In this video, I'm going to show you how I improved the primary drive gearing on this Gladstone fitted with a Triumph 750 TR7 engine. The bike is fitted with a conical rear hub, 16-inch rim and high-profile tyre with the smallest rear sprocket you can get and the largest front sprocket you can get, so the gear ratio is as tall as it can be, but it's not enough. So I thought the best thing I could do was fit a bigger sprocket on the crankshaft. So I removed the primary chain case cover to have a look, and this Triumph engine was fitted with its standard 29 teeth sprocket. I did a few calculations and I determined that the largest crankshaft sprocket I could fit was 34 teeth, so I got one made locally to match the existing 29 teeth sprocket. And here's the existing front sprocket on the right and the new 34 teeth front sprocket on the left. The new sprocket is 5 teeth bigger than the old sprocket, and here you can see its triplex configuration and slight increase in size. To fit the 34 tooth front sprocket, I had to first remove the 3 bolts that hold the alternator to the crankcases. I will be relocating the alternator windings into the clutch cover like on most Japanese bikes. And here you can see it slides on just perfect. I also have to relocate the front chain tensioner pivot point as well, so I make a new pivot out of an old cap head bolt, because cap head bolts are ideal for this sort of situation where you want high tensile steel. The first thing I do is to machine away the head of the bolt using a carbide cutter. With the head machined down, I grip the bolt in my vise and cut it off to length using my hacksaw. I then put the bolt back in my lathe, turn down the end to a diameter and cut a new thread using my die wrench. With the new thread cut, the next thing I need to do is to go up to my shed and use my angle grinder to cut the slot for the tensioner blade to fit into. I'm using 1mm thick slitting discs on my angle grinder. These make very light work of cutting the high tensile steel, and they're very easy to control. With the slot trimmed to size, I tried the chain tensioner adjuster bar in and it fits perfect. So now I can try the whole assembly with the tensioner blade and the adjuster bar on the pivot pin. And that slides on just nice. Back in the garage, I'm ready to assemble the new pivot pin into the engine. I've previously cut off the old pivot pin and re-drilled and tapped a hole very slightly lower so that it clears the sprocket at the front. I use a drop of Loctite thread lock on the threads just to make sure it doesn't come loose. With the pivot pin screwed home, I reinstall the tensioner blade and the adjusting screw and tighten it up until the blade just starts to curve. I can now start the reassembly of the primary drive, so I insert the woodruff key into the input shaft of the gearbox. Then I install the gear change. It's really important you don't forget this because you can't fit it after you've fitted the clutch. The clutch and crankshaft sprocket have to be installed together with the chain, and they just slide on nicely. Then I re-engage the gear change shaft, check the spline shafts free and put on the hub, followed by the washer and nut. The gearbox is already in 5th gear, so I lean over with my foot pressing the brake pedal so I can tighten the centre nut tight. Then I check the clutch hub is free and the basket is free before starting to install the plates. There's quite a few. With all the clutch plates installed, you can put the clutch pressure plate on and adjust the 3 tensioning screws on the pressure springs so that when you pull the clutch in, it moves evenly. With the front crankshaft nut tightened, I use a screwdriver to pry up the tab washer, then tap it over nicely with a punch and a hammer. until it fits closely against the hexagon of the nut. The next thing I need to do is to relocate the alternator windings into the clutch cover. I can use 2 existing holes that are there already, but I need to make a new pillar with a thread in it so I can secure with a 3rd hole. So to do this, I turn up a bit of aluminium on my lathe with an M8 threaded hole in the centre. With the diameter turned, I take out the cutter and replace it with a parting off tool. Set the depth to get the correct length, and then part off the aluminium spacer. Using an old alternator rotor, I bolt the whole assembly up into the outer clutch casing and tack weld the new spacer in place like this. Then I remove the old alternator, finish the weld on the pillar, then replace the old alternator, do up the bolts just to make sure it all fits nicely, which it does. And here you can see the new threaded pillar with the bolt screwed into it, and then the 2 nuts and bolts at the front holding the alternator windings in place. The next thing I've got to do is cut the gasket to trim around where the wire goes through. This makes it easier to assemble. That's better. Now the wire feed hole is clearly visible in the centre. I apply a thin bead of Permatex Ultra Grey sealer onto the engine cases. This will stick the gasket in place and prevent any leaks. I then replace the outer cover, feeding the alternator wires through as I go and pulling them tight. This will ensure they clear the chain. Then all the cover screws can be tightened, and finally I go around with a sharp knife and trim off all the excess gasket that's protruding. I think Tracy's about to make some more cupcakes, so I pop into the kitchen to have a look, and she is, and she's just getting all the ingredients out of the cupboard. I didn't realise how much go into it, so first of all she has to weigh up some butter and cut it up and put it into our food mixer. Then she weighs some sugar and pours that in and gives it a good old whisk up until it goes all smooth. And then she has to crack some eggs into a cup and pour them into the mixture, followed by some flour. And when the measured amount of flour is put in, she adds a little drop of vanilla essence to make them taste nice, followed by some glacier cherries, just the right amount poured in, and then they're whisked up with a whisk, which cuts them up into little bits. The mixture is now ready for putting into the cups, about 1 spoonful per cup, and that rises up into a lovely cupcake. We put them in the oven at about 180 degrees C for about 20 minutes until they rise just perfect, and when they come out, they look amazing. I can't wait to try one, but I'm on strict instructions to wait till they cool down. So I go back out into the garage and the sun's come out, so I decide to bring the Gladstone out into the sun to clean the carburetor. The Triumph twin engine fitted to the Gladstone No1 has a single carburetor head. This makes it so much easier to work on. You just have to remove the fuel pipe and take off one carburetor and strip it down. With the fuel pipe removed, I loosen the 2 nuts securing the carburetor to the cylinder head. This has to be done evenly each side, gradually pulling the carburetor back so the thread's clear. The next thing I do is loosen the 2 screws holding the cap onto the main carburetor body and pull out the slide. With the carburetor removed from the bike, the intake trumpet just unscrews. Then I remove the fuel pipes and the filter at the bottom by undoing the nut. The float bowl can now be removed by undoing the 2 screws. On the amyl concentric carburetor, the float and float valve stays in the bottom float chamber. And here you can see the central main jet, which I will loosen off with the spanner and remove for cleaning. It all looks pretty clean actually, but I think one of the air bleed holes is blocked, so I use a bit of carburetor cleaner. I removed the air screw so I can clean out the air passage by squirting in some carburetor cleaner, and you'll see it squirting out the front. I look round and Tracy's come out to clean out the hedgehog feeding stations. We have 2 or 3 hedgehogs nesting in the garden and we feed them every day, and they come out at night and go in the feeding stations and eat all the food and usually leave behind some deposits which we have to clean up in the morning. But anyway, back to the carburetors. They're all dried out in the sun and it's time to put it back together. As carburetors go, the Amel Concentric is a very simple carburetor to work on and it all goes back together really easily. Before I took the carburetor apart, I made a note of the air screw setting so I could reset it to the same position. I replaced the fuel filter, followed by the fuel pipes, and do up the nut. Then the carburetor is all ready to go back on the bike. Before I can actually fit the carburetor to the engine, I put in the throttle slide and do up the 2 screws. Then I can offer it up to the studs, do up the 2 nuts, and she's all ready to go. I drained out the stale fuel and replaced it with a gallon of fresh petrol, so I'm all ready to go for a test drive to test out the new gearing. I was really pleased how it went. It was so much nicer to ride. The gears were so much taller and it seemed to pull stronger and harder. So I thought, let's load it up in the truck and take it over to Henry to see what he thinks.
Quite unbelievable, Alan. It's a transformation, man. Total transformation. You don't like it? I mean, obviously I kept within the legal speed limit, and it just performed beautifully, man. What an amazing thing you've done to it, Al. Unbelievable. Oh yeah, I think I'm going to have a vape and celebrate. Good. That's incredible.
Well, I had a great ride on the Gladstone. As it says on the box, it's a hooligan machine. It makes you ride like a hooligan. It is so loud, but it's great fun. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe.